This is a 1973 Ford Capri RS2600 and it is a genuine factory race car. It's also very rare, being one of only 6. It was built by the Ford of Germany competition department to FIA Group 2 regulations, and it was built to contest the 1973 European Touring Car Championship, which Ford won in 1971 and 72. Now I say it's one of 6, but it's actually really one of 4. 6 cars were prepared for the 1973 season, but 2 of these were updated 1972 models, while the other 4 were new builds. This is one of the 4. Now, these cars were all powered by the Cologne V6 of just under 3,000 cc's and topped with Kugel-Fischer fuel injection. They were developed by Westlake and they produced around about 330 horsepower. And the biggest and most notable difference to these cars over the 1971 and 72 models was these new box style fender flares. The 1971 and 72 cars had much more subtle looking flares. And this was a grandiose program. Among the many drivers that were driving for Ford in 1973 were Jackie Stewart and Emerson Fittipaldi. These guys finished first and second in the 1973 Formula One World Championship. So it's kind of like having Max Verstappen and Lando Norris go and race touring cars on their spare weekends. But it was all to no avail. There were 8 rounds in the 1973 European Touring Car Championship, and in the first 4 races, both Ford and BMW took 2 wins apiece. But then BMW turned up for round 5 at the Nürburgring with the latest homologation version of the 3CSL. This included the Aero package with all the crazy wings and stuff. BMW won the last 4 races and also took the title. And so Ford went back to the drawing board for 1974 and came up with the Capri RS3100. This featured the Cosworth GAA V6, which was based on the larger Essex motor. It had 4 camshafts, 32 valves, and was topped with Lucas fuel injection. Now this particular car can be identified throughout its 1973 program for wearing a yellow Ford windscreen banner. Each car had a different coloured banner, and this one wore yellow. And it had yellow bands along the back window as well. It was also the only car where the hood pin wires wrapped over and under the front of the hood. Now Ford tended to rotate its cars, and this car didn't contest all the ETCC races in 1973. But among the races it did compete at were the Spa 24 Hours and Le Mans 24 Hours. Le Mans wasn't part of the ETCC, but Ford raced there anyway. And as you can see, you can spot this car by its yellow windscreen banners. And so the 1973 cars were made available to sell, including this one, but not before it was raced in Macau by Allan Moffat, where it won. In fact, Moffat actually tried to buy this car, but the deal fell through. I assume that Ford Australia were expected to pick up the bill, but ultimately it was purchased by Kiwi racer Paul Fahey, sent to New Zealand, and it's been here ever since. It made its New Zealand race debut at Bay Park in December 1973, but not before Fehee and his crew rubbed back the factory blue paint and gave it a new look in Air New Zealand colours. Fehee raced the car in the 1974 New Zealand Saloon Car Championship pretty much as it had been raced in Europe. And although he won a few races, he found that the little Capri kind of ran out of puff against the V8 opposition. So for the 1975 season, he repowered it with a Cosworth GAA, which produced around about 440 horsepower, and it absolutely transformed the car. He won a bunch of races that season, including at Wigram, where Allan Moffat and John McCormack were across from Australia to take on the top locals. There were a bunch of different leaders in that race. It was quite an epic event, but this car here came out on top. Anyway, Fehee went on to win the 1975 New Zealand Saloon Car Championship and promptly retired from racing. The car was sold to Cran Judge for Grant Walker to race. Walker was actually the reigning New Zealand Formula Ford champion at the time. Unfortunately, The V8 opposition had really got its act together and top scoring results were getting harder to find. This was basically still a Group 2 car competing against heavily modified V8s and the first of the tube frame cars that were starting to come to New Zealand. As well as racing the 1976 New Zealand Saloon Car Championship, Walker also raced the car in selected rounds of the 1976 Australian Sports Sedan Championship, and he actually took third in the opening round. He contested selected rounds of the 1977 New Zealand Saloon Car Championship, and then the car was sold again. And it was bought by South Island racer Inky Tullik, who completely revitalised its career. And he did this by fitting it with a small block Chevy V8 to run in the South Island Oscar series. He also replaced the gearbox and the rear end. The rear end became a Ford 9-inch unit. By the late 1970s and early 80s, modified sedan racing had become really popular in New Zealand, and this car was leading the charge. Tullik won the 1979 Oscar Championship and won a bunch of races all over the country, and in fact he was really hard to beat. In 1983 he sold the car to another South Island racer by the name of John Osborne. John Osborne actually had another V8 Capri that had been destroyed by fire, and so this car was kind of bought as an interim measure. You see, he was building a V8 powered Mazda RX-7 to run in the Oscar series. When the RX-7 came on board, this car was sold to Ross Cameron, and he kept it until 1987 when it was sold to my good buddy Roger Townsend, and Roger still has the car to this day. Now Roger has been slowly and very carefully restoring the car, and I know that 1987 is nearly 40 years ago, but if you know Roger, you know he is very particular, likes things to be done just right, down to the last detail. And also, this car required a lot of work, and that included sourcing some very rare parts, but also the body was in really bad shape and required a lot of restoration work. As well as the V8 transplants, it had also been rolled when Grant Walker raced it. But also, Roger has other race cars, other stuff to keep him busy. He also has a 1972 Ford Capri RS2600 factory race car, and in fact, one of the cars that this car replaced. He's raced that car twice at Classic Le Mans and run it at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. So he has a lot of other stuff going on too. Now, somehow here in New Zealand, we've ended up with factory Capris from 1972, 73 and 74. As well as Roger's two RS2600s, we also have a 1974 Capri RS3100, which I featured on the channel a little while back. And in fact, Allan Moffat purchased that car about a year after he tried to buy this car. Now for me personally, this car is part of my childhood. I got to see Inky Tullik racing it in 1981. I was about 9 years old at the time, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And I also got to see John Osborne race it. So for me, it's a really great thing to see it being so beautifully restored. Anyway, I'm going to bring Roger in so that he can tell you more about the car and its restoration.